Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 11th and the last episode of the Circular Chat, Season 5, which is on tracking and traceability. ICCE brings this weekly program to bring together experts and practitioners from various sectors to delve into the integration of circular practices and sustainability in business models. As we embark on the fifth season, our focus centers on circularity in electrical and electronic equipment sector in collaboration with the NSRCL, the Startup Incubation Center at IIM Bangalore. Today, this is our last episode of this season. Throughout this season, we have explored pivotal topics such as life cycle of electrical and electronic equipment, e-waste collection, closed and open loop business models, material composition, sustainable business models, from dismantling to recycling, responsible recycling, and India's vision for circularity in the WEEE sector across 10 episodes. To discuss today's topic, we are delighted to have Mr. Kalyan Bhaskar, faculty member in the Strategic Management area at XLRI Jamshedpur. He teaches and carries out research in the areas of sustainability and public policy. On these topics, he has worked with and for the government organizations like MeitY, Niti Aayog, MoEFCC, etc. And his work expands to many international organizations also, like IFC, GIZ, UNEP, a few NGOs, and private sector as well. Mr. Kalyan is an electrical engineer from NIT Bhopal and PhD in public policy from IIM Ahmedabad. Before joining XLRI in 2017, he had worked as a faculty member in IIM Lucknow and as an engineering officer in Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited. He has also taught at IIM Indore as a visiting faculty member. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Kalyan, today. Welcome, and we appreciate your time. Thanks a lot for your presence.
Thank you, Survi, so much for extending that invite to me. And I'm glad to know about this series of Circular Chat and just being running in the fifth season and the topics that we have covered in this ongoing season. So all of them are pretty contemporary, pretty relevant for us, and especially in the year that India saw a lot of movements on the front of circularity. So this year began with our Prime Minister talking about the role of circular economy for India in the first month. And then we had several national and global developments in this front. So very glad to share my thoughts on this topic.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So we have a set of questions ready for you. The first question that is coming your way is, see, we have, because there is a context of tracking and traceability around the different waste, supply chains. Now here, especially we are talking about, because we are talking about electronic waste, I would want to know how effective tracking and traceability how effective and tracking traceability contribute to the overall goals of a circular economy. But I mean, especially in the context of electronic waste.
So I'll break perhaps your question in some silos, because in your question, I see mention of the term circular economy, then about tracing and traceability. So let me give perhaps an example of in fact, let me begin with this thought. What do we mean by circular economy? And then we'll try to explore the importance of traceability and the tracking of the material. Now, the broad definition of circularity, if we look into, it's creating a closed loop system. Closed loop system, essentially, that the traditional model of mining a material, mining a mineral, then processing it till it becomes usable, it becomes usable, comes into a usable form, then you manufacture it with other materials, then you come up with the final products, then you transport it to the consumer, then the consumer goes to the life cycle of that product, and then this becomes waste, where waste essentially means it is no more of use to that customer. Waste does not mean that all the components of that product have lost their value. And therefore, we find that there are some people who are interested in that waste, and then it goes through the traditional loop. That's the traditional loop. When we talk about circular loop, at each of these stages, even at the mining stage, if you go to any of these mines of these minerals, there will be some mining waste. Can we make use of that mining waste and bring it back to some or the other form, some usable form? Then even in the manufacturing stage, there will be some waste that would be generated, process emission waste, and waste of any types. Then at the consumer level, and finally post-consumption level. So the idea of a circular economy is that at each of these stages, the waste that is generated, can we make use of that in some or the other form? Maybe not in the same firm by the same industry, but by some other firm in some other industry. So that's the whole idea of a circular economy. And as this definition suggests, it needs to into looking into avenues to explore that, not just in the same industry by the same firm, but by someone else. And here, let me take about a company that is located next to XLRI Jamshedpur, Tata Steel. For years, Tata Steel and other steel companies in general have been grappling with what do we do with slag, and especially LD slag that comes out of process of production of steel. And for centuries, in fact, for a century, for Tata Steel, this had been mostly of a headache, that how do we dispose of this waste. Of late, what has happened in the last 5-6 years, Tata Steel has figured out that this slag, which is an inevitable part of the production of steel, it can be processed into fine aggregates that can be used for road construction. That closing the loop possibility is there. And that possibility is not just within Tata Steel, but with some other industry, that is road construction. So that idea that waste of one can be the input to the other is a beautiful example of circular economy being put into practice. But for that, you need a cross-industry collaboration, so cross-firm collaboration. And that is often what the success of circular economy relies on. Can you find those avenues? Can those scope in one industry, one other firm, where this waste can be become part of that? So that's one part. Now, if we talk about electronic products in particular, now electronic products, for example, consider this phone that I have in my hand. So this is not made of one material or one mineral, and you have several precious materials: gold, silver, some valuable materials like copper. Then you have some rare earth elements. Then you have some materials, group of materials called critical minerals, plastic, glass, metal, ferrous, non-ferrous, some hazardous materials. All of them get into before it can come into a shape of an electronic product in our hands. Now, once we want to upgrade to another product, we want to replace to another product, what happens to all those minerals? Are we able to recover and recycle or replace all of those minerals and materials? And then that's the challenge. The challenge gets multifold, because if I'm using, for example, a Samsung phone, Samsung might not be mining all the 50+ materials that go into making that electronic product, or might not be controlling all those companies that make smaller components that go into that product. And then how does that happen in the case of any electronic manufacturer? The challenge that comes, for example, if tomorrow now Samsung were to claim that, okay, I use 100% recycled aluminum in my phone. Now, how do we verify that? Now, if we were to leave only on to the manufacturer's claim, there would not be an example of something called greenwashing in the industry. And greenwashing is a thing that runs across all facets of industries, all sectors, where companies claim to be something that they are not. And let me give an example of a very, like on a lighter sense, what happened with me last month. I happened to go to a bakery, and I was looking for healthier alternatives of some cookies. And it's a newly opened bakery. And the owner directed me to a shelf and said, "Sir, we have some multi-grain cookies here." So I said, "Okay, let me go to the ingredients of multi-grain cookies." Now, multi-grain cookies gave me an idea that multiple grains, not just atta, wheat, flour, would be used to make those cookies. And what I figured, the grain, there was only one grain, that is maida, refined wheat flour. And when I asked that owner of the bakery that where are the other multi-grains in these cookies, she sheepingly told me that by multi-grain, she meant a spattering of grains on the cookies. The cookies have been made only from maida, but some multi-grain have been sprinkled over that. And that's a beautiful example of a greenwashing. Now, she might not be doing in that intent, but for her, multi-grain means just one multi-grain over a cookie, and that would make it multi-grain. Similarly, there are companies that say we recycle all the products. And when you ask them for the claim, how do you recycle it? Is there a documentary evidence? Often they might lack in that documentary evidence. From my own field research in India, what I figured out, there are companies that claim that we have collected this much e-waste every year. And when you go and actually track that, where is that e-waste and what is the route through which you have collected that? What we have figured out, the same e-waste they are collecting, selling, trading for more than 1 year. So the same e-waste is being accounted multiple times in their statements, where they can go and claim that, okay, this is, we have collected 70%, 80% of our e-waste, while on ground, they are just rehashing their previously collected e-waste. And that is happening because there is a lack of assurance right now in the sector now. Governmental bodies, NGOs, private sector is trying to create a mechanism where there is a sort of a more robust mechanism to do so, and to assure all the stakeholders involved in this process that the claim that you're coming out, there is a data behind that, there is a process behind that. And I think that is where the role of traceability and tracking of these materials come. So if I were to say that, and many electronic product manufacturers today mention prominently on their website that this much aluminum or this much material is recycled content in my electronic product. Good if you are doing so. But again, what is the proof for us? How do we ensure that the claims that companies are making, there is a data behind that? And that is there where the crux of your first question lies. The tracking and traceability will help us get that assurance. So there I think link and then maybe come back to it later. And just to, as I mentioned to you before the start, I'm having that power outage now. Therefore, you might be seeing the light has gone slightly dim. I hope it come back soon.
It's fine. It's fine as of now. Yeah, so it's very well explained, I would say, you being a faculty member. So that shows in your explanation how well you have, connected the dots and how well you have explained everything with examples. So definitely you have shared examples of, where people are misusing the word and greenwashing, about greenwashing also. Now, we would want to know of some successful case studies now. These are like where people are, or not as have, are effective in improving the management of electronic waste. So please share something like those examples.
So I lost you for a while in the bits, will be last about 10-15 seconds. So essentially, if I were to get it right, you are asking me to explain, are there any examples of successful stories of companies in the sector for tracing and traceability?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think more than this, perhaps what I can do is I can talk about mechanisms like this, some from this sector, some across the sector, in which companies and the industry, so at some time there has been a firm level response, sometimes there have been an industry level response to finding out the source and origins and the tracking of one or more of the input materials. For example, if we talk about palm oil, the most common, the most traded oil in the world, and palm oil that is there in our namkeen, in our chocolates, in our dalda. So that's where palm oil comes. 90% of the global palm oil comes from Indonesia and Malaysia, because that is where the bulk of the production happens. These are countries with large rainforest region. And for converting those rainforests into palm oil plantations, large-scale deforestation has happened, which has brought it to the attention of global multiple different stakeholders, affecting the flora and fauna in those countries. So there has been a movement called RSPO, Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil, which essentially, for example, convinces you as a manufacturer, imagine in India, you are getting your palm oil from Indonesia, Malaysia. You have no way of knowing whether it has been grown using a sustainable route or a non-sustainable route. And this mechanism helps provide that assurance, RSPO. So that is one example of that the input palm oil to your product, is it coming from a sustainable or a non-sustainable source? So there is a mechanism like that. Coming to electronic sector, 13 years back in 2010 in US, there was an act that was passed called Dodd-Frank Consumer Protection Act, broadly. And there is a section in that Dodd-Frank Act which talks that if there are electronic manufacturing companies listed in the US, listed with the Securities and Exchange Commission US, SEC, and if they were using 4 minerals, tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold, 4 minerals collectively known as conflict minerals. Why conflict? Because if it is coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which earlier was known as Zaire, ZAIRE. So if these four minerals, without which you cannot have any electronic manufacture products assembled or produced today, if any American companies were using these minerals and sourcing it from Democratic Republic of Congo, they have to disclose that. And this clause of that act affected companies like Intel, companies like AMD, companies like Microsoft, which might be coming out with chips, processors, or electronic devices which might contain these four minerals. Till 2010, none of these companies had any idea about the origins of these minerals, because A, they did not have mines directly in Democratic Republic of Congo. And that is where lies in the beauty or the challenge of electronic sector. In electronic sector, the supply chain is very long and very complex. So imagine, let's say, consider a mineral like tantalum. Now there is a mine in Congo. Now that tantalum, after being mined, does not directly land up in Intel production facility. It goes through multiple stages. So that mined mineral is, let's say, processed, polished, or some impurities are removed before it becomes, from mineral becomes to material. And then it might be happening at some refining facility, some located in Congo, some may be located outside of Congo. Then there are traders involved at each of these various stages. From there, it might go to a facility where some part manufacturing might be happening. That facility might be near DRC, might be in some part of Middle East, Europe, Asia, Latin America, wherever. Then from that component, it might go to a sub-assembly manufacturer. Then it might go to a contract manufacturer like Foxconn, for example. And then from there, Apple might have given it a contract that, okay, go and manufacture it for me. And then it might be coming out in a shape where it might have a final end company's logo, Apple or Samsung or Intel. And then it goes to a consumer again through multiple retailer distributors, and then leaves the premises controlled by these electronic companies and comes to a consumer and goes ahead. Now, through this long and supply complex chain located across the countries, which in technical terms we refer to as global production networks, GPN. So far, material has flown. The mechanism of flowing the information, where did it come from, where did it originate, at what facility, which mine, that did not exist till 2010. And that was a challenge for Intel and other companies. But how do we go? And often these mines are located in regions which have very limited governance, or which are prone to conflicts. And how do we go? And that is when Intel started the process of trying to trace the origins of materials. And there they encountered several challenges, including where the mines are actually coming out, there are no NGOs perhaps, or there is limited access to a global international companies to go and do that audit. And that might affect your claim, that you cannot give that claim. And often, let's say there are 10 different mines located around, let's say, Jamshedpur. All those 10 mines might be producing tantalum. All those 10 might be coming to a common facility where it is polished and then sent to a refiner. Now, that company might not be forwarding that information that these are all the mines where it has come from. Some of these mines might be producing it in a sustainable manner, some of it might not be producing it in a sustainable manner. And then how do you collate that information and process it throughout that long chain where the end company might be headquartered in San Francisco and selling it perhaps in Toronto? And that's the challenge in the electronic sector. So how do you do that? But today, if we jump 13 years later, there are organizations that help give companies like Intel the certificate or that label called conflict-free mineral. So those organizations are working with other grassroots level organizations to help companies like Intel come out with a claim like this. But if you were to take it, that do they give 100% guarantee that these are coming from conflict-free minerals? Now, depending on what is contained under the word conflict, it can challenge, it can vary. For example, some of these organizations might have their FEC standards, and that is how they typically come out with a claim. That, okay, there is a due diligence, there is a standard, and if you abide by this, then we can help give you a claim of conflict-free. But for a layman, if you were to ask, does it mean no conflict has happened in the production of that mineral? That guarantee may be hard to come by. But today you have mechanisms and systems to at least give that claim. Now, does it mean that all the tantalum being mined today in the world is conflict-free? No. But is it where it was in 2010? That's also no. So some progress has been made, but not to, let's say, full extent. So this conflict-free, this sustainable palm oil are examples where you have had some success like this. Similarly, you have something called responsible steel. Tata Steel, for example, and other steel companies in India have come out with a pledge that by sometime in 2040, 2045, all their steel manufactured by their facilities would be responsible. Now, what does responsible mean? It could again mean different things. It could mean that no child labor has been involved, or no flora and fauna has been affected, or some of those things which is contained in the definition of responsible steel. Similarly, in responsible gold. So there are organizations, in fact, World Gold Council in 2019 came out with a standard that all our members would now come out with responsible gold. So across the sectors, we find mechanisms similar to this, where they are trying to give some assurance on a material used as an input in their production facility. But you have these challenges, and the challenges essentially account for the fact that the supply chain is very long, spatially distributed across the world, and very complex. And that makes it quite challenging.
Absolutely. So, as you had shared that the supply chain is very vast, and its horizon is among the whole world, and it's a very difficult task to track and trace all the materials those are coming from where and going where. So that ways. So now, how does extended producer, now you are talking about account, because that talks about accountability also. Now in extended producer responsibility, how does EPR contributes to traceability efforts in the electronic waste supply chain? And what do you think the role that it can play in ensuring accountability and transparency?
Again, so I'll keep going back to that part. So when you talk about extended producer responsibility, if we were having this conversation 30 years back, this term had not yet been coined. There was no EPR in 1993. Now, all these developments, a lot of the circular economy developments, a lot of sustainability developments, a lot of terms like EPR, this new framework, this new paradigm, this all emerged post adoption of Brundtland Commission report in 1987, Our Common Future, and subsequent Rio Summit in 91, which alerted the world to a problem, sustainability and climate change, which was not just a country problem, not just a company problem. This was a global problem. And then how do we come out with a global response to that? So this paradigm, when it emerged in Sweden by a Swedish economist, this challenged the whole notion of what is a producer supposed to do? Because now the producer name itself suggests, if you look into the dictionary, is an organization that produces something and sells. But this EPR notion is challenging that notion, that your responsibility is not just to produce something and sell, but it extends post-consumption. So once you have sold it to the consumer, what does the consumer do with it? And it also happens to, it also extends to what happens before you produce something. For example, if, and that's what I have found in 10 years of this rule being implemented in India and e-waste. Often people equate EPR with waste collection. And waste collection is necessary, but not sufficient thing for a company to discharge its EPR responsibility. And often in CAT/SAT exams, we have these questions like necessary and sufficient. So it is necessary, yes. You cannot commit or discharge your EPR responsibility if you don't do something on e-waste collection. But that is not where the story ends. For example, if I am making a product, if I am designing a product, and I'm designing a product in a manner where it is very difficult to repair it, I'm not discharging my producer responsibility. Or for example, the recent controversy or the news that has come up that Microsoft will stop perhaps extending support to Windows 2010 devices after 2025. And an organization in Europe has come out with a report that this mere act of not providing support to tens of millions of devices in the world using this might make all those devices obsolete. And then it will suddenly become e-waste. Not because the devices have lost value, because of some material degradation, but because the software on which it runs will be not provided support post 2025. Now, Microsoft as an organization might have valid concerns that why extending this 15-year life cycle, then they would want to focus their attention to 2011. There might be organizational part to that. But will this responsibility of taking care of MS 2010 devices and the e-waste that might generate from this, will it come under EPR or not, would again depend on how does Microsoft considers what is the role of producer. And this is just an example. So designing a product so that it lasts long, integrating eco-design into its production facility, including modularity, for example, in produce product, having more recycled content in the product, or helping in waste collection, helping in waste reuse, recycling. All of these are parts of extended producer responsibility. And because this definition, it often depends when companies go for complying with this, they often restrict to what does the applicable domestic law define EPR in this. So if the law defines EPR as collection and recycling, the companies often tend to stop there. And that is where this definition can change with jurisdiction. Today, if you were to talk, just do a table. How do different companies define EPR? You will find that variation. And that's a challenge for the companies also. I am a multinational company. Now, if I am operating in Russia, Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and let's say UK, all these 5-6 countries define EPR differently. And I have facilities in all these 5-6 countries. Now, how do I comply with the existing laws? And also as my organizational responsibility, whatever I define that. And that's an organizational conundrum also for these companies. So there is that inner leadership or that vision or some leader of the company, that role comes into play. And different companies have different approaches to EPR. And traditionally, what anecdotal evidence suggests, European countries typically tend to consider EPR in a different light than non-European companies. Because then the extended part, they look it into different realms, perhaps a more wider realm. While some of the other companies might look into this from a more short-sighted, perhaps, lens. So that, again, there's that level of variation that we see in the responses of these companies.
Absolutely. So there are variations, as you said, the European countries, they are more evolved, I think, than the other countries.
No. So again, I'm not talking about countries. I'm talking about companies headquartered in Europe. So companies, okay, they typically tend to deal with it slightly differently than some of the others.
So do you mean to say that they deal with EPR differently and in a better way than the other countries or the companies which are operating in somewhere else, or I mean, those have different origins? So European companies, they have a better dealing of EPR, a wider perspective they have of EPR, that means?
Yeah, so again, this might vary from a company to company, but if I have to draw any broad generalization, that okay, there is a company with headquarters in X and company in headquarters in Y. And if X happens to be typically a European, and that to a Northern European country, now that company is far more likely to treat EPR in a broader sense, in a more holistic manner. And that might also do with, and typically we see even in the green policies, in any sector do we see, the most prominent public, government and vocal support, industry support is from generally companies located in these regions. And they typically tend to come out with the most aggressive wind policies or solar policies or EV policies or any other such policies. There is a broad, wide public support for such measures, and that gets reflected in the culture of that organization.
So here, I think the public support and the policies, I hope we can work upon that, though there's a huge scope that I think other companies or other countries will be working on those, I think. Now, with the digital technologies coming in, you see digitization everywhere in every field. In your view, which digital technologies have shown the most promise in enhancing traceability in this sector? And how do these technologies address specific challenges in the circular economy?
Now, if you talk about now, how do we deal with challenge and how can we leverage technology to deal with this challenge? There have been scattered, isolated incidents of companies that have been able to do so in a limited manner, to achieve some, being effective and achieve the desired objectives. Now, one of the technologies could be blockchain. Often blockchain gets associated with Bitcoin. But leave apart Bitcoin, blockchain is essentially a ledger system that cannot be damaged or trampled. And there are examples of companies like De Beers and companies like Louis Vuitton. What they do is, for some of the ingredients that they focus on, so Louis Vuitton for luxury goods, DBS for diamond, they rely on blockchain. That every process through which that product passes, the entity has to add some details on that ledger. And that ledger, now it might be meeting the target, it might not be meeting the target. But then when you pick up a piece, then you can look into what has gone in the background, the upstream supply chain of that material. So that is leveraging blockchain for that. Now, there are companies also that use RFID technology. For example, there is a fast food chain, Chipotle in US. And what they do, so in some regions in US, I think they want to provide that assurance to their customer that the produce that you're having in a restaurant, it has come from a sustainably grown farm. So from a farm to table, to track that, they are using RFID technologies. There are companies that use GPS for vehicle tracking. And essentially for your supply chain, the materials, GPS can be a good tool. I think in Europe, post 2017, I think the Swiss government and the European Commission, they had invested in a platform called Prosum, something called prospective, secondary, and urban mining and mining waste. Essentially, creating an urban mine data knowledge platform where all the producers, all the recyclers, all the component manufacturers will add in the data that this much electric vehicles we have sold, or this much EV batteries we have recycled. And from that continent, EU level database, then we can come out with an estimate of the current stock and every year flow. That new product that is being entered into the market, that is being sold, and the product that is getting into the waste stream. And I had some conversations with people who were associated in setting this up, and people who are now associated with the next version of Prosum, which is called Futuram, FUTURAM, which is again extending this there. And what they say, it's a very challenging task even for a European context, in which a lot of this is in the formal sector. So even with the latest technologies, most formal markets, they are not able to meet all the desired goals of setting up this urban mine data knowledge platform. So these technologies, even when everything is systemized and in the formal sector, don't always help deliver, and the veracity of that data, there is always that question mark, and then it comes to the best reliable estimates on that. So we have some examples. Again, this we are now again talking about this QR code based part. In fact, there is a new idea called EU digital passport, which will be implemented from 2026 onwards, which essentially talks about that if I am having a phone now, I can scan that code and I can look into all the facilities where components of this could have come. Now, if we have to systemize that process, what we might require, so if there is a vendor in Taiwan who is making a component for that phone, now that information should also be retrieved by scanning this barcode. And therein lies a crux of all this problem, all the discussion that we are having. Can domestic policies solve a problem that is essentially global in nature? And that is where the crux lies. We don't look elsewhere, we just look into climate change. Now, can domestic different countries with different elected governments, with different domestic priorities, can they come together and draw and bring in this energy to solve a problem like climate change? And 30 years of evidence suggests it has been largely ineffective. And that's what even in the recent COP28 in Dubai, there were people who were saying this is too little, too late. So that too little, too late is because everyone is trying to address this from their own lens. That, okay, I am US, how do I address that while talking about reviving my own economy and not leaving the competitive edge to China? China is trying to say, so now you have, or China, India typically say, well, you have polluted for 100 years. Now let me come out with that level and then we will try to, and we are being aggressive. Unless the climate finance comes, don't expect us to do more on that. So, and that's the whole idea in circularity also. So you can come out with a digital passport, but if a Taiwanese manufacturer and the Taiwanese government is not on board, and they say, okay, we will not come on board. And for example, today, without the consent of a company like TSMC, which is perhaps a monopoly in some of the most advanced microprocessors in the world, no such digital passport mechanisms can work. So when in the upstream, it's not a competitive market, and it's essentially a monopoly or a duopoly or an oligopoly. And if they decide, okay, I am not going to cooperate with this, I will not help this because this is going to add too much cost on me, and the consumers are not willing to give that price to me, then why do I need to comply with it? So there again, there might be that, okay, you can scan some data, but it excludes these components. So again, you can give that claim, but those things might be excluded. So again, a global concerted efforts, and I think 2023 we have seen some of those efforts in terms of alliance of critical minerals. So in terms of critical minerals, there is a mineral security partnership. The G20 communique talked about again this. So there have been some movements where the world finally in 2023 is trying to see, let's join our efforts, pool in our efforts, and try to solve a problem, which is not just a company problem, not just a country problem, it's a global problem.
Absolutely. So the last question, we are coming to an end of this session. My last question to you would be, from your perspective, what government and industry policies have proven effective in promoting transparency and traceability in supply chain of electronic waste, and how these policies impact material recovery efforts?
So here perhaps I will talk about, in fact, there was a study which had come out after this Conflict Mineral Act in US, which looked into factors at what makes this long and complex supply chain visible, at what affects the visibility of a supply chain. And using data from the US companies that had been working on conflict mineral policies, things to declare that the materials are not coming from conflict regions, they identified 6 factors: visibility of the firm, reputation of the firm, organizational complexity of the firm, supply chain complexity of the firm, the power the firm have over suppliers, and what is the extent of participation in CSR on voluntary ground by the companies. So these 6 factors were considered important to affect firm level decision. Now, if we look into the Indian specific thing, the thing that gladdens my heart, if we look into BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting disclosure format that SEBI had brought in 2021, and the first set of mandated reports came out this year. Of the 107 disclosures, there are disclosures the companies now need to make on circular economy front, on extended producer responsibility front, on how much waste they have recycled, are there policies for recycling using recycled content there. So these disclosures, to begin with 1,000 companies now, and then SEBI has amended this thing. So by 2027, we are staring at a situation where the top 1,000 companies in India would need to disclose this information, not just for themselves, but for the 80% of their value chain suppliers, and to get it audited. So that information as a source of power, mechanisms that focus on information related disclosures, that can bring in a range of change in this part, because suddenly information that companies were not even tracking, forget disclosing, they were not even bothered about that. Now they have to set internal system and processes to figure that out and to disclose it. And that disclosure will be seen by their investors, by shareholders, and by NGOs who might pick up one or the other topic. And that might bring in a more set of informed consumer and the larger stakeholder awareness about those topics. And then a number of things can get triggered on. So disclosures mechanisms can work. Now talk about the single-use plastic ban that was announced in India. Now today, when you go on a flight or in many restaurants, you will find that those plastic spoons have been replaced with bagasse-based spoons, the wooden cutlery made out of wood waste or an agro waste. That wouldn't have happened, that push wouldn't have happened had this mass sensitization about the perils of single-use plastic, had that not happened. So some of that part, the mass societal awareness about the drawbacks of some of the commonly used alternatives, commonly used products, that can trigger in. Talk about a GST, for example, GST regime. We have now 5%, 0%, 18%, all those regimes. Right now, for example, we don't find a differential GST regimes if a product has more recycled content. But if that were to happen, that if a product has recycled content more than 10% or 20%, it would attract a lower GST. So that can give a incentive and a pull to companies that are making those in the recycling system. And that can nudge also large companies, okay, let's go to that. And for the consumer also, it would help you differentiate a greener product versus a otherwise conventional product. So these are some methods, I think, because you have to incentivize both the demand. So people should want these products and the supply. The company should be willing to make these products. So that demand and supply, if you're able to do so without the reliance on subsidy for a long time, because any sector, you cannot rely on a subsidy for eternity, even for our EVs, even for solar panels. And we have had multiple instances where governments thought subsidy say everything can work. That hasn't worked. And subsidy puts the finance. So besides subsidy, which can be limited short-term measures, these information disclosure mechanisms, these tax incentives and rebates, this nudge that by 2030, some targets, we will move away from this, that can work in a country transitioning from a linear economy to a circular economy.
Absolutely. So it has been a very comprehensive explanation by you, Mr. Kalyan. And with this, we are ending this session. And thanks a lot, Mr. Bhaskar, for coming here and sharing your insights on this important topic today. And thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you so much, Survi, for providing me this opportunity. And I hope anyone who watches this later and would want to remain engaged can reach out to your, I would encourage them to go through your past seasons, because I've gone through some of those videos, really informative videos, and it helps provides a variety of exposure to topics that we might not come across in our conventional media sources. So please watch the other seasons of Circular Chat and feel free to reach out to me in case any of the points that I mentioned, you have any queries, have disagreements, for example, because I might have taken example of some companies and some things, and you might have an odds with it. Nothing against those companies, nothing against those parts, but just for explanation, I mentioned those companies and examples.
Absolutely, absolutely. You tried your best, I think, to explain what have been asked from you, and we did have a very enlightening session. And thanks for watching this video. Whosoever will be watching this video later on, I hope we have been able to provide genuine information and information and awareness through this episode. With this episode, we are coming to an end of season 5, which is based on circularity in EEE sector. We'll soon come up with a brand new season, which will again bring all the stakeholders together to brainstorm the solutions and share knowledge. Do follow our social media handles. We'll update you all for the upcoming events. You may also subscribe to our newsletter. If you have any queries, please feel free to reach to me at survi@icce.com. Have a great evening. Thank you. Thanks a lot for watching this video.